mid-engine Corvette is finally here. It's finally in production and finally heading to dealerships across the country. And that means I can finally answer all those questions that have been burning in the back of my mind since I first saw this thing last year. This is the biggest generational change the Corvette has ever seen, and so I want to know stuff like, is it still practical enough for day-to-day driving? Can it still hold up to a day of abuse on the racetrack? Does it still sound good? And does it still offer the best bang for the buck performance on the market? Basically, what I want to know is this thing still a Corvette?
The first question, of course, is whether it still looks like a Corvette. And that's a little bit debatable, to be honest. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that even without the badges, most people would be able to pick this out of a lineup as a Corvette, but it's still certainly a radical departure from before, and that overall profile is plenty more exotic than the C7, or any previous generation Corvette for that matter. The nose is far shorter and the tail quite a bit longer, as you would expect, but the biggest shift visually are actually those massive air intakes just after the doors, keeping the 6.2-liter V8 cool. The new LT2 is of course the heart of the beast, now fully on display in its new location, closer to the center of the car. The new motor makes more power than before too, up to 490 horsepower from 455 last year, and 465 pound-feet of torque from 455. But opt for the performance exhaust, which we have on here, and you're looking at a slightly tastier 495 horsepower. Not to mention a 0 to 60 time of less than 3 seconds, plus a much surlier exhaust note. Chevrolet's done a great job of packaging here, still keeping the Corvette trademark removable Targa roof and giving you room in the trunk to store it. But where in the last-gen car you could still fit some bags and the roof in the rear hatch, in the new Corvette you almost certainly can't. The good thing there's a frunk this time around. From an overall aesthetic standpoint, the Corvette is definitely a head-turner, but I have to say it's all just a little bit too busy for me, with too many fussy lines and styling cues, a problem that extends to the interior.
I've been lucky enough to drive every generation Corvette, yes, even the C1 with its terrifying brakes and its 3-foot wide steering wheel. And of course, this thing feels like a spaceship compared to that. But even compared to the C7, the previous generation Corvette, this thing feels radically different. The first thing is it feels much more shrink-wrapped than before, and I think part of that is because I've got a pane of glass back here, where before, of course, I had an open cargo bay, but also the way the cockpit's designed is designed to really highlight the driver and really feel like I'm tucked in here, which is great so long as you're the driver. If you're the passenger, you're kind of out of luck. A lot of the controls for the HVAC, for example, are along this kind of silly-looking row of buttons that run all the way down the right side, everything from temperature to fan speed, seat heater controls. They're all in here. They're all oriented toward me, which is nice as the driver. But if you're the passenger and you want to change the temperature, you're going to have a little bit of a hard time doing that. The navigation system, too, is oriented toward me. I've also got buttons kind of scattered all over the place. This ridiculous row on the right, other HUD controls are down the lower left. Everything's kind of spread around a little bit more. And I don't really like that too much, but I do like the seating position. I feel like I'm sitting low. I feel like I'm in the middle of the car, which is great. And ultimately, this feels like a really engaging place to be. But probably the biggest step forward over the C7 are the materials. Everything in here looks and feels fantastic. From the Alcantara on the wheel, I've got carbon fiber trim around a lot of different things. Even the plastics feel like they're on a different level compared to what we had in the last generation Corvette. And that definitely makes this feel like a much more premium car, maybe even like a mid-engine European car. Right now we've been mostly tooling around the speed limit because we're on the roads, and we've been in tour mode, which is the more comfortable way of driving this car. Here we've got both the LT3 option package and the Z51 performance package on this car. That means we've got a very comfortable ride mode right now. The brakes have also modulated themselves to be a little bit more easy to modulate. The steering is nice and light, and that new 8-speed dual clutch transmission, which is the only transmission for now, basically feels like an automatic. But with a twist of a knob and a little bit of patience, it takes about 3 seconds to change modes annoyingly. You can go from sport mode, and then you go into track mode, and then the fun starts. racetrack now in the C8. We're in track mode at Spring Mountain, which is in Pahrump, about an hour outside of Las Vegas. This is a really great facility, really nice place to put this thing through its paces. In track mode, this feels like a completely different car. It's, of course, stiffer because the magneto-rheological suspension can adjust and dynamically adapt itself based on what you're up to, and what I'm up to right now is pushing it, to say the least. The transmission, of course, can adjust as well. Got that 8-speed DCT, which has got super quick shifts. They get much more aggressive here. I'm using manual mode right now, and I probably don't need to be. It's a little bit more fun that way. General Motors says they actually wired these shift paddles directly to the Tremec transmission to give you more responsive shifts, basically instantaneous. And I gotta say, I don't know if that's marketing fluff or what, but it works. Every time you tap this paddle, you immediately get the gear. There's no lag, no delay. And this will absolutely hold that gear all the way to rev line. You can bounce off the rev limiter as long as you want to, and this thing will not auto upshift. That's pretty nice. The steering's got a little bit more weight to it as well, which honestly I don't like. If I were going to make my custom drive mode, which you can do, I'd be turning this down to the more touring-oriented, less resistant steering mode. But maybe the most interesting thing in the C8 is that the brake pressure changes depending on what mode you're in. This has basically a brake-by-wire system. They call it e-boost, similar to what you'll find in the NSX and a couple of other production cars on the road right now. So that means that basically what I feel when I step on the left pedal with my left foot is almost an entirely synthetic sensation. So as I'm running around and doing laps here in the desert, if it were a hot day, for example, I really wouldn't feel any brake fade. The car would more or less just take care of it and give me a really strong, consistent pedal feel, lap after lap after lap after lap, and that's a good thing. Yeah, okay, it makes me a little bit more disconnected from the car. If I were worried about brakes overheating, it'd be a little bit less feedback for me. But on a short stint like we're doing today, just a couple laps, it means just nice, consistent feedback all the time. But it also means when you get out on the road, you have a more easy to modulate brake pedal. That's a good thing. So, that's all about how the car kind of adapts to track mode. How does it feel in the track? Really good. The car will understeer. The car will oversteer. Basically, this thing will do what you want it to do. And that's really what you want. It feels really nicely, neutrally balanced, and really aggressive. The steering feedback is really strong. I feel like as soon as I make any input on the steering, the car immediately reacts. And part of that is because I'm sitting 16.5 inches further forward than I was in the last generation Corvette. So that means as soon as I turn the wheel, I actually feel it because I'm a little bit closer to that moment, that turning radius, and it's a little bit closer to my hip. So even though this is a bigger, heavier car than last year, it feels more nimble out here on the track. And that means I can push it a little harder. Pahrump, this circuit, Spring Mountain, has a number of long corners, left and right, which if you were driving a normal car with a normal oil pan sitting down below, oil sloshing back and forth as you're going left and right, might pose some starvation issues. But it's a great test for, there's some understeer, there's some oversteer. This is a great test for the new dry sump system that they've got in the new V8 this year. Chevrolet engineers told me that the Corvette will sustain 1.25 Gs laterally with no oil starvation issues. That's pretty remarkable because you're not likely to sustain that for very long on your average racetrack. They also say that the Z51 package, which has some extra cooling, is good enough to do basically as long a track session as you want in 100 degrees Fahrenheit without the car overheating. They said you could put in a full tank of gas, lap around here in a 100-degree day, and the car would never overheat, and that's with the air conditioning on. That's pretty impressive. I can't test that today. It's actually closer to about 50 degrees today. In fact, I've got the heat on today. But if you live in a place like this and you want to be doing this kind of thing in the summer, that's good to know. And that's also very encouraging if maybe you've heard some cooling issues in the previous generation Corvette. Now, what about this cockpit, which felt a little bit claustrophobic out on the street? Out here, it feels pretty great. I've got good bolstering for my knees so I can brace myself against the side of the car. And there's just enough padding that I'm not getting bruises on my knees, which can be a problem when you're going through courses as technical as this. And the car certainly sounds a lot nicer out here as well. People think that a mid-engine car must necessarily sound better than a front-engine one, and as an owner of a mid-engine car, don't get too excited, it's just an MR2, I can tell you that that is not always the case. In fact, just idling through town in the C8 Corvette before, the effect is a little bit more like a sewing machine than a big V8, because really what you're getting is just a lot of valve noise. But out here on the track, in track mode, with the sport exhaust wide open, sounds pretty good. And I just missed my braking point by about a mile. Maybe we'll edit that one out. Now this track has changed a lot since the last time I was here. It's grown a lot, this whole facility's grown a lot. And so I'm not terribly familiar with this track. It is pretty tricky, but I feel like I can come around here and attack immediately and feel very comfortable in this car. And that, I think, is about as glowing an endorsement as I can give. On the road, the new Corvette is as comfortable and practical as it ever was, and thanks to the new transmission, you don't have to make the choice between the comfort of an automatic and the performance of a manual. You kind of get the best of both worlds. That's doubly true out here on the racetrack, where this thing is an absolute demon. So, is this thing still the performance bargain that it ever was? Is this thing still a Corvette? The answer is a resounding yes. That's what I think of the new Corvette, but we want to know what you think. Let us know in the comments, like, share, and subscribe, and check out theroadshow.com for all the details.